Hello and welcome. So I have decided to make a little short video for you, and it's based on the front fly zipper because I know some of you just want to crack on and get on with a few things, and I thought, you know what, if you want to be able to draft this over the bank holiday, then you've got this tutorial to help you along. So let's get cracking, eh? So you're going to need a few supplies, a couple of good rulers, something to cut your pattern out with, obviously your pattern draft, which I've got mine here, my favourite rubber, pattern, a good mechanical pencil, some scrap fabric to make yourself a little sample, and I've got something here that will give me a nice curve. Okay, so if we look at the front fly zipper, main function is to allow us to put our trousers on. In this particular case, it's got a nice J-stitch with a small bar tack to prevent the fly from breaking. This one's also got a facing. It's actually got a separate facing. For ours, we're going to create it as an extension. And it's also got a placket, and the placket protects the zipper from the skin. And in this case, you can see that the placket here is made at an angle. We're going to make ours at a basic rectangle. So I've got my draft here. I've got this centre front draft. And the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to add some seam allowance to my centre front rise. And my seam allowance is going to be 1 centimetre. I wouldn't add any more than 1 centimetre. If you want to add 0.5, that would be sufficient as well. But don't add anything more than 1 centimetre. So I'm just making some small dash lines, and then I'm going to connect all my lines. To make sure I know which line is which, I'm going to remove my old lines as I'm going along. So we've got our extension, we've got our 1 centimetre here. That's our seam allowance for the centre front. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to create our fly extension. So to work out the fly extension, you will use the hip line as a guide. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to extend my hip line. I've just extended it just beyond. And to work out the width of our fly extension, we're going to go by 3 centimetres as a basic guide. And when you take your 3 centimetres up, will be taken from the original line, not the seam allowance. If you want to make your fly extension wider, you're welcome to, but I always make mine at 3.5 centimetres. So I'm just making some lines, and then I'm going to connect all my lines up. I'm going to extend the waistline, and then I'm going to connect all my lines up. So I've got a basic rectangle here. The next thing that I'm going to do is I am going to add some seam allowance. So when we look at the fly extension, most of the time, the fly extensions always come to a curve. And to be able to create that curve, you can use your curved ruler to create that curve. I often just use anything around the house that I find that it has got a nice circular motion on it. So the first thing that I do is I come in 1 centimetre and I create my curve from there. So I'm creating a nice soft curve, and that line we're going to ignore, and that line we're going to ignore. But I've also got a seam allowance, so I need to create a curve on the seam allowance as well. So I'm going to ignore that line and that line. So that's our fly extension, and the seam allowance, as we've said, is 1 centimetre. So the next thing that we're going to need to do is create ourselves a fly facing to protect the zipper from the skin. And this fly facing is a rectangle. The one that we saw in the other example was in a triangle shape. So here's a fly facing that I made earlier. I've added my seam allowance. I've drafted my fly facing. So I've started from my original centre front line, and I have drawn myself the original rectangle, which is here. I've added myself some seam allowance. And so I don't get confused, I'm going to keep this one as a rectangle, and my extension has a curve on. And I've also added myself some balance marks to tell me where the waistline starts and where I'm going to stop sewing at the front right. The next thing that we need to know is where the zipper is going to start. So we need to decide where we're going to put the zipper. But before we do that, what we're going to do is we're just going to remove this seam allowance line here. I'm not totally removing it because I need to remember that that is still a seam allowance when I decide to put this together. But just for now, whilst I decide where the zipper is going to go, I'm just removing that line. So the zipper, when we start the construction process, the zipper will be... So we need to decide where the zipper is going to be placed. And this being our fly extension, one side of the zipper will be stitched onto the fly extension. The other side of the zipper will be stitched onto the fly facing. So for today, I'm going to add myself some little dash lines just roughly in the center, and that will tell me that's where the zipper is going to be placed. This is actually the location of the zipper teeth. And what I'm also going to do is I'm going to add myself a balance mark as well, so I know exactly where these points are. Okay, so now it's all going to start to make sense. So what I have done, this is my trace off. I have traced off my pattern piece, but I've just basically traced off like the front section. I've also got my my placket. I'm just going to write on here that this is the fly placket. And we're going to cut a pair because we're going to turn this in. So it's going to get stitched on two sides. It'll get stitched there and we'll sew it at the bottom. But at the top where the waistband is, that area won't get stitched. But what you could do is you could overlock it because it'll get caught within the waistline. And along this seam here, this seam won't get stitched, but you could overlock it closed. So I would overlock that on a 4th thread. And I would also overlock the waistband area. Okay, so your center front, when you cut this out, you're going to cut one side with the fly extension. So you'll cut a pair basically, but what you'll do is one will have the fly extension, one you'll actually remove it. And the reason that you'll remove it is because that's going to be the one that's going to have the placket stitched to it. Right, so the first thing that we're going to do is we are going to place the zipper right in the center, and the zipper gets placed face down. And what you need to do is to look and make sure that the teeth are going to hit in between those two balance points, just there. And we're going to pin that into place. So that indicates the side that we start sewing. And what we're going to do is we are going to sew all the way down with a 1 centimeter. And what I like to do is I like to just turn my zipper tabs back. It just means that they get finished and they look nice when they're finished. They get caught into the waistline, but they look a little bit nicer. So you're going to sew 1 centimeter all the way down on the side where the curve is, and you're going to back stitch at both ends. It's going to make a little lap just over where the seam is for the zip fly to open. So my zipper is now pinned in just at the side where the curve is, and I've back stitched at both ends. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to turn my trouser leg round, my front rise, and we're going to sew just in between the front rise. So I'm going to line up the pieces here, and all we're going to do is we're going to sew in between this balance mark and your other balance mark further down. You should have 3 balance marks, so you'll sew in between your first balance mark where the zipper ends, and you've got another balance mark further down. And the reason that we're sewing it now is because it becomes difficult to sew it later on. So I'll just show you here. You can see that I have started from where my zipper ends, and I have closed just the inside rise there with my right sides together, and that's my seam there. I've just closed the whole seam as it goes. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to make like a little zipper sandwich. So this opposite side of the zipper, I'm going to put the facing on the outside. Just going to pop a pin in there. And the other side of the trouser leg is going to get caught in. So that means that the zipper is sandwiched in between the opposite side, the center front, and the zipper placket. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to place some pins in. It's just like a little zipper sandwich. And before I sew it, I'm just going to check to make sure that I've got this right. So I'm just going to place it in the as it should be. And you can see there we've got an area for the fly to open. The fly gets nicely covered over. This would be where our J-stitch would be. You should have a balance mark to tell you where you're going to stop sewing. Okay, so this is my zipper complete. I just wanted to show you so that you can see. The zipper is nicely covered over there. The zip fly is nicely covered over. When we open it, we just want to check that the placket is doing its job, because that's going to protect the zipper from our skin. I've also overlocked it to start with. I've got a couple of nice little balance marks there that I know are meeting up, so that tells me that the zipper is in the right place. And the next thing to do is to draw myself a nice J stitching, and to do that I use the fly extension. So I just use the curve of the fly extension as the curve to create my J stitch, and that helps me get a really nice neat curve. So just to recap, I have drawn in my J stitch. I've just used some tailor's chalk there. I've sort of pinned it into place to get it ready for me sewing. But before I sew it, what I'm going to do is I'm going to fold back the placket, that way I don't get that in the way of my stitch. And I'm going to use a straight stitch, and I'm just going to sew it and follow that curve nice and even, and then I'm going to bar tack it at the end. And here's one that I made earlier. So when we sew a J stitch, ideally you want the J stitch to finish where the previous extension was, because the idea is that the extension is going to be caught within it, so that all the fabric is going to be closed in that area. And then what you will do with the placket here, you will run some back stitches so that it's caught onto the edge of the zipper. Generally this would be where the actual zipper tab is, and what you would do is you would just run a couple of stitches to catch it into the zipper tab, or you could use a bar tack. And if we look, that's our fly all done, our front fly zipper. So I hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and I'll catch you in the next one. Bye for now.